I thought I was the most miserable woman alive when I heard my husband died in a plane crash over the ocean. But my tears dried up instantly when the cloud server I programmed suddenly synced his heart rate data, showing a steady 75 beats per minute. My late husband was not only alive and kicking somewhere, but also planning to turn me and our unborn child into scapegoats for the scam of the century. Hello to all our wonderful listeners of Violet Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep our operations running. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these revenge stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section. My name is Harper Flores. It was exactly 2 o'clock in the morning when the shrill ringing of the telephone shattered the heavy, peaceful silence of our master bedroom. I was exactly 4 months pregnant at the time, my hand instinctively coming to rest on the slight, firm swell of my stomach as I reached blindly for the receiver in the dark. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to a customer service representative from the airline, and their words sounded agonizingly robotic, entirely detached from the world-ending reality they were delivering to my ear. They told me that the overnight flight carrying my husband, Silas Mercer, had inexplicably vanished from the radar screens and plummeted directly into the dark, freezing waters off the coast of Miami. The representative paused before delivering the final blow, stating there were absolutely no survivors. The oxygen in the room seemed to evaporate in a single second. I distinctly remember the plastic phone slipping from my trembling fingers, hitting the polished hardwood floor with a dull, hollow thud that echoed my newly emptied life. The physical reaction to ultimate, earth-shattering grief is not merely crying. It is a violent, total bodily collapse. My knees gave out beneath me, and the next thing I knew, my vision faded into a terrifying, suffocating blackness. I woke up several hours later in a sterile, blindingly white hospital room, the rhythmic, electronic beeping of a fetal monitor serving as the only sound tethering my consciousness to reality. The doctors kept me under strict, continuous observation to ensure the severe psychological shock had not triggered a miscarriage. Through the thick haze of medical sedatives and unrelenting burning tears, my department manager at Novaris Nexus Solutions called my cell phone. I worked there as a senior data architect, building impenetrable, secure networks for corporate clients. But lying in that hospital bed, I felt like the most fragile, easily broken system on Earth. My boss spoke in a gentle, hushed tone, telling me to take an indefinite leave of absence, promising that my position would be waiting for me whenever I was remotely ready to return. But how could I ever be ready? My entire future, the beautiful family Silas and I were building together, had just been violently swallowed by the unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. The morning after I was finally discharged from the hospital, our large house felt like an abandoned tomb. I sat motionless on our living room couch, wrapped tightly in his unwashed gray sweater, desperately trying to inhale the rapidly fading scent of his cedarwood cologne. That was when my laptop on the coffee table chimed. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. An email had arrived in my primary inbox, sent directly from Silas's personal email address. The subject line read, "My final words." My hands shook so violently, I could barely manipulate the trackpad to open it. It was a pre-scheduled message, a digital ghost reaching out from beyond the watery grave. The text was shockingly brief, utterly devoid of the warmth and poetry that usually colored his written messages. He wrote that if I was reading this document, something terrible had happened. But then, the tone shifted into something jarringly cold and pragmatic. He wrote, "I do not want you to be chained to a ghost. Harper, let go of the past immediately. You should terminate the pregnancy, give up the baby, and start a completely new life without any burdens tying you down." I stared at the glowing pixels on the screen, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The words felt utterly alien, as if written by a stranger wearing his skin. Terminate the pregnancy? Give up the baby? This was the exact same man who had spent 48 hours painting the nursery a soft pastel yellow just 3 weeks ago. This was the man who had knelt and kissed my stomach every single night before we went to sleep, whispering grand promises and lullabies to our unborn child. The sheer terrifying absurdity of his written request pierced right through my thick fog of grief. Silas wanted this child more than he wanted air in his lungs. Why would a dying man's final, desperate wish be the total destruction of his own flesh and blood? A cold, unsettling feeling began to creep up the base of my spine, forcefully pushing aside the overwhelming sorrow. Something was profoundly, fundamentally wrong. The agonizing grief was still there, but it was now thoroughly tainted with a sharp, undeniable, and venomous suspicion. I needed to feel close to him, or perhaps I just desperately needed to make logical sense of the madness unfolding around me. I walked down the stairs into the basement, stepping into the climate-controlled server room that housed my personal computing racks. As a paranoid data architect, I had built a highly secure, closed-loop cloud network exclusively for our home automation and personal devices. Silas was heavily obsessed with his fitness and wore a top-of-the-line biometric smartwatch that synced directly and constantly to my private servers, bypassing the commercial cloud entirely. I sat down at the main terminal, the hum of the cooling fans filling the silence, and pulled up the system logs. I was perhaps hoping to find his last recorded moments of distress before the plane went down. The command prompt flashed green in the dim light. I accessed the encrypted biometric database, fully expecting to see a flatline timestamp to the exact minute the flight went off radar. Instead, the screen populated with an active, flowing, real-time data stream. My breath hitched violently in my throat. I blinked hard, leaning much closer to the high-resolution monitor, completely certain that my grief-stricken, sleep-deprived mind was hallucinating the numbers. The biometric readout was vividly green and updating every second. Heart rate, 75 beats per minute. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, bypassing the standard graphical interface to aggressively query the raw GPS coordinates directly from the watch's continuous transmission packet. It was live. The watch was physically moving. The data was absolutely not a delayed packet bouncing around a dead network. It was an active, unbroken uplink. My deceased husband's heart was beating perfectly, calmly, and steadily. I swiftly ran a reverse geolocation protocol on the IP address, transmitting the cellular signal. The satellite map on my screen rapidly zoomed out from the dark Atlantic Ocean, completely bypassed the tragic wreckage site off the coast of Miami, and dragged far to the south. The bright red pin dropped onto solid land. It landed squarely on the coordinates of a luxury, 5-star beachfront resort in Cancun, Mexico. The ocean had not swallowed my husband. He was simply lounging on a vacation. The heavy tears on my cheeks went completely dry in an instant, instantly replaced by a glacial, horrifying, and razor-sharp clarity. I wiped the last remaining tear from my cheek. The salty moisture on my skin felt entirely foreign now, replaced by a searing, electric focus. I was no longer a grieving widow. I was a senior data architect staring at a compromised system, and my husband was the malicious malware. I cracked my knuckles and launched a brutal, multi-threaded brute force attack on his heavily encrypted personal laptop sitting right upstairs in our office. Silas always thought he was clever with his cybersecurity, but he had conveniently forgotten who actually built his digital walls. Within exactly 45 minutes, I had completely bypassed his two-factor authentication and gained root access to every single account tied to his name. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, tracing digital footprints he arrogantly thought he had completely erased before his departure. I started my deep dive with his financial portals. A massive offshore transfer immediately caught my eye, glaring brightly against the black screen. Just 72 hours before his supposedly fatal flight, Silas had quietly liquidated his entire 50% stake in his tech startup. He had cashed out for exactly $4,500,000. But the money did not go into our joint savings account, nor did it go into any legitimate domestic investment fund. I meticulously traced the routing numbers through a complex maze of dummy corporations until the final destination flashed on my monitor. It was a private, airtight trust fund registered in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary name listed on the trust document hit me much harder than the initial news of the plane crash itself. It read, Elena Rostova, Elena, the woman who had been my absolute best friend since our freshman year of college, the woman who had caught my bouquet at my wedding. He had funneled every single penny of his wealth directly to her. The sudden nausea in my stomach violently twisted into pure, unadulterated rage. I initiated a deep scan protocol to recover the deleted cache on his secure messaging applications. Thousands of fragmented text strings rapidly reassembled themselves, painting a grotesquely clear picture of their long-standing affair. They had been sleeping together for over 2 years, but this was not just a simple, sordid romance. It was a highly calculated financial conspiracy. I read through months of meticulous, cold-blooded planning. Silas was not just running away from our marriage. He was staging his dramatic death to trigger his massive corporate life insurance policy, a policy worth exactly $15 million. Elena was the designated proxy who would slowly launder that massive payout once I, the naive, grieving widow, inevitably collapsed under the immense pressure and let his estate lawyers handle the complex paperwork. They were going to steal my future, my financial security, and disappear together into a life of absolute luxury. But the absolute worst of it, the single horrifying detail that made my blood run entirely cold and my vision tint with red, was found in an encrypted folder labeled Medical. It contained a series of discrete, untraceable bank transfers to a man named Dr. Harrison, my private obstetrician, the doctor who had been warmly monitoring my pregnancy since day one. I frantically cross-referenced the precise dates of the payments with a recovered text thread between Silas and the doctor. Silas had paid him $250,000. I read the recovered messages, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the heavy edge of the desk. Silas had bribed the doctor to swap my prescribed prenatal vitamins with a highly specific, dangerous chemical compound designed to induce a completely natural-looking, spontaneous miscarriage. He wrote to the doctor, "The package must be eliminated before the claim is filed." He wanted to entirely eliminate his only legal heir, so there would be absolutely no complications, no messy investigations, and no delayed payouts from the insurance company regarding a surviving dependent. He was willingly plotting to murder our unborn child just to ensure his payday went smoothly. I sat perfectly still in the humming chill of the server room, the glowing monitors casting harsh, sharp shadows across my face. I had been betrayed on a level so profound it defied basic human comprehension. My husband was a sociopathic monster, and my best friend was his willing, greedy accomplice. They wanted me broken, childless, and utterly destroyed. A normal person might have shattered right then and there, falling apart into a million unrecoverable pieces. But the betrayal was so massive, so methodically calculated, that it acted as an absolute catalyst. Every ounce of weakness, every lingering shred of love I ever held for that man, instantly incinerated into ash. In its place, a cold, calculating, and ruthless mental architecture began to form. They had built their entire scheme on the absolute certainty that I was weak, trusting, and easily manipulated. That was their first and most fatal error. I did not scream. I did not smash the computer screens. I calmly backed up every single byte of evidence onto a secure, offline, encrypted flash drive and tucked it safely into my pocket. Then, I slowly walked upstairs to the master bathroom. I opened the mirrored medicine cabinet and stared at the innocuous-looking white plastic bottle of prenatal vitamins with my name printed clearly on the pharmacy label, the poison meant to kill my child. I unscrewed the child-proof cap, poured the small, lethal pills directly into the toilet bowl, and firmly pressed the flush handle. I watched the swirling water take away Silas's murder weapon. I then carefully refilled the bottle with harmless, generic vitamin supplements from a bottom drawer, ensuring everything looked completely untouched to anyone observing. I looked up and met my own reflection in the mirror. My eyes were heavily red and swollen, my face ghostly pale. It was the absolute perfect picture of a devastated, helpless widow. I practiced a trembling, agonizing sigh, forcing fresh tears to well up in my eyes. "I am going to bury you both," I whispered softly to the empty room. I decided right then and there to give them exactly the magnificent performance they expected. I would play the shattered wife to absolute perfection, while I quietly and methodically prepared to burn their entire world to the ashes it deserved. The memorial service was held exactly 10 days after the airline officially declared the search and rescue mission over. I rented a modest, understated chapel on the outskirts of the city, intentionally keeping the guest list small, but ensuring the local news affiliates were anonymously tipped off about the exact time and location. As the cameras flashed rapidly from behind the velvet ropes, I delivered the performance of a lifetime. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back messily, completely devoid of makeup to let the deep, dark circles under my eyes take center stage. When the minister spoke about his tragic end, I let out a sharp, agonizing wail that echoed off the stained glass windows. I collapsed against the front pew, burying my face in my hands. The media captured every single sob, cementing my public image as the broken, helpless, and thoroughly devoted widow who had lost the absolute center of her universe. Inside my mind, however, the gears were turning with the cold, frictionless precision of a well-oiled machine. Then, she approached me. Elena. She glided down the aisle wearing a tailored dark silk suit, her face arranged into an infuriatingly perfect mask of sympathetic sorrow. She wrapped her arms around my trembling shoulders, pulling me into a tight, suffocating embrace that smelled heavily of her expensive jasmine perfume. I sobbed into her collarbone, feeling absolute disgust radiating through my veins. "I am so incredibly sorry, my sweet friend," Elena whispered, gently stroking my hair. "I cannot even begin to imagine the pain you are carrying right now." I pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, forcing my chin to quiver. "I do not know how I am going to survive this. Elena, I feel completely empty." She sighed heavily, adopting a tone of pragmatic concern. "Listen to me carefully. I know this is incredibly hard to hear, but you have to think about your own survival now. The baby, raising a child all alone, while carrying this crushing grief, it will destroy you. You read his final email, right? He wanted you to be free. He wanted you to start over without this heavy burden. You should truly consider doing what he asked. It is the most merciful choice for everyone." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her words almost made me break character. She was looking me right in the eyes, pretending to comfort me while actively pushing me to murder my own child to secure her stolen fortune. I swallowed the bitter bile rising in my throat. Instead of screaming, I reached out and grabbed both of her hands tightly, squeezing them with desperate gratitude. "Thank you for being here," I cried, tears streaming down my cheeks. "You are the only person who truly understands." As I pulled her in for one last, desperate hug, my right hand slipped down toward the open clasp of her designer handbag. Between my thumb and index finger, I held a custom-modified, military-grade GPS micro-tracker, no larger than a standard painkiller capsule. With a swift, practiced flick of my wrist, I dropped the tiny device directly into the dark depths of her purse. It landed silently among her keys and cosmetics. I stepped back, wiping my eyes with a tissue, completely confident that my digital leash was now securely attached to her. Later that evening, the chapel was completely empty, and the cameras were long gone. I sat in my darkened basement server room, watching a glowing red dot pulse steadily on a digital map of the city. The tracker transmitted its location exactly every 30 seconds. Elena had not gone back to her registered townhouse. Instead, the dot moved steadily across the river and stopped permanently at a highly exclusive, ultra-secure high-rise apartment building in the financial district. I cross-referenced the address with property records and quickly found that the penthouse suite had been leased just 2 months prior under a shell corporation. That was her safe house. That was where she was hoarding his physical assets and waiting for him to return. The next morning, I dressed sharply and drove to the offices of the most ruthless, aggressive financial crimes attorney in the state. I sat across from his massive oak desk and slid a thick manila folder toward him. It contained a carefully curated selection of the data I had extracted from the laptop, specifically the routing numbers and the Cayman Islands Trust Fund documents. I played the part of the confused, betrayed wife who had accidentally stumbled upon hidden marital assets while organizing her deceased husband's estate. I instructed the attorney to file an immediate, emergency injunction, under the strict guise of investigating an active dispute over marital property. The lawyer filed the necessary paperwork to freeze the entire $4,500,000 in the offshore account. Elena would wake up to find her stolen fortune locked behind impenetrable legal red tape, completely inaccessible until a judge reviewed the case months down the line. But that was only half the battle. The real prize they were waiting for was the corporate life insurance payout, exactly $15 million. That night, I brewed a pot of incredibly strong coffee and cracked my knuckles over my keyboard. The insurance company's legacy mainframe was laughably outdated. I did not just hack their system, I orchestrated a flawless, simulated cyber attack. I deployed a sophisticated spoofing script that mimicked a foreign ransomware group breaching their routing databases. Within 3 hours, I had subtly rewritten the encrypted beneficiary code tied to the policy. When the insurance firm finally processed the catastrophic claim, the automated clearinghouse would not send the funds to the account Elena and Silas had prepared. Instead, the $15 million would be temporarily diverted and held in a heavily encrypted, anonymous holding account that only I controlled. I left absolutely no digital fingerprints, ensuring the company's IT department would spend weeks chasing ghosts in Eastern Europe. They thought I was a weeping victim, but they had absolutely no idea they had handed the keys to their entire financial future to the architect of their destruction. I maintained constant surveillance on Elena's penthouse network. My quiet intrusion allowed me to mirror her smartphone activity directly to my secondary monitor in the basement. It happened precisely at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The official notification arrived via a secure email portal from the primary underwriter at the corporate insurance firm. The automated message coldly informed Elena that the massive payout of $15 million had been indefinitely frozen. The fraud department had flagged a critical, unresolvable anomaly regarding the digital beneficiary routing codes and the specific identity parameters of the recipient. I watched the live camera feed from her laptop as Elena read the devastating message, the color completely drained from her flawlessly manicured face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll about to shatter. She grabbed her phone with violently trembling hands and dialed a highly encrypted, international internet phone line. I had already compromised the encryption keys 2 days ago. The crisp audio fed clearly into my heavy headset. "Silas, we have a massive problem," Elena hissed into the receiver, her voice shrill and tight with rising panic. "The insurance company locked the funds. They are launching an internal investigation into the beneficiary identity." A string of vicious, suppressed curses echoed from the sunny Mexican resort on the other end of the line. "That is absolutely impossible," Silas snarled, his carefully constructed facade of calm completely shattering. "I set up the routing protocols myself before I left. Someone inside the firm must have triggered a manual audit." "What do we do?" she cried, tears of pure frustration leaking out. "The trust fund is entirely frozen by your wife's lawyer, and now the primary life insurance payout is locked behind red tape. We have absolutely zero liquid capital left." "Quiet," Silas snapped, his tone turning viciously cold. "I cannot fix a corporate firewall from a beach chair. I'm going to use the backup passport. I will cross the southern border tonight and be in the city by tomorrow morning. Do not speak to anyone, and do not make any sudden movements." The prey was willingly leaving his safe sanctuary, and walking blindly right into my waiting snare. But I needed to dictate his exact movements once his boots hit the ground. I needed him to walk directly into the center of the web. The following afternoon, I invited Elena over to the house for herbal tea. I intentionally arranged the living room to look like the chaotic, depressing aftermath of deep mourning. I scattered empty cardboard boxes, shredded documents, and old photo albums across the expensive Persian rug. Elena arrived looking visibly exhausted. The immense stress of the frozen assets carving deep, dark lines around her eyes. I poured her a cup of hot chamomile tea, making absolutely sure my hand shook slightly as I handed over the delicate porcelain saucer. "I am so overwhelmingly exhausted, Elena," I whispered, wiping a perfectly fabricated tear from my cheek. "I was clearing out his home office yesterday afternoon. I found a loose, hollow floorboard hidden beneath his heavy oak desk." Elena stiffened instantly, her teacup freezing halfway to her lips. The porcelain rattled softly against the saucer. "What did you find, Harper?" I leaned in close, lowering my voice to a frightened, conspiratorial whisper. "A hidden steel wall safe, and I found a very strange, heavy brass key securely taped to the bottom of his desk drawer. I tried to open it myself, but the lock is rusted or jammed. I have absolutely no idea what he was hiding in there." Her eyes darted nervously around the messy room, her mind visibly racing. "You should probably just leave it alone. It is likely just old tax documents or useless paperwork." "No," I replied firmly, shaking my head with innocent determination. "The estate lawyer said we need full transparency for the probate court. I called the local police precinct this morning. A senior detective is coming here exactly at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning to drill the lock open and take the contents directly into official evidence." I watched the absolute, unadulterated terror wash over Elena's pale face. She knew Silas kept his most sensitive digital ledgers, offshore backup keys, and original identity documents in that specific safe. If the police opened it, their entire criminal conspiracy would be laid bare under fluorescent precinct lights. She made a pathetic, stuttering excuse about a migraine and practically ran out of my front door less than 10 minutes later. By the time her luxury car pulled out of the driveway, I knew she was frantically texting Silas the exact location of his impending doom. I did not sleep that night. I packed a small overnight bag and quietly relocated to a secure hotel suite on the far side of town. Before leaving, I had transformed our beautiful house into a digital fortress of invisible surveillance. I installed 4 micro-infrared cameras in the home office, positioning them perfectly to capture every single angle of the hidden safe. I linked the high-definition feeds to my remote laptop, establishing a secure, real-time viewing channel. The digital clock on my screen read exactly 2 o'clock in the morning when the perimeter motion sensors finally tripped. My pulse hammered a steady, rhythmic beat against my throat as the black and white infrared feed flickered to life. A tall, shadowy figure dressed entirely in dark clothing slipped through the reinforced back door. He moved with the quiet, practiced efficiency of a man who knew the precise layout of the house. He moved confidently because he was the one who bought it. Silas Mercer crept through the dark, silent hallway, a heavy steel crowbar gripped tightly in his right hand. He wore a dark baseball cap pulled low, but as he turned his face toward the bookshelf to scan the living room, the night vision lens caught his profile perfectly. My legally dead husband, breathing, moving, and actively trespassing in the home he abandoned. He moved swiftly up the carpeted stairs and entered the office. He threw the heavy rug aside and pried up the false floorboard with shaking hands. The steel safe gleamed dully in the dark. He pulled the heavy brass key from his pocket. Elena had clearly relayed the exact details of my fabricated story. He inserted the key and forcefully turned the heavy mechanism. The thick steel door clicked sharply and swung open. Silas dropped the crowbar on the floor and reached eagerly into the dark cavity, expecting to retrieve his ultimate salvation. His hand emerged holding absolutely nothing but a single, crisp piece of white printer paper. I zoomed the camera lens in tightly as he held the paper up to the pale moonlight filtering through the window blinds. I could not see his eyes, but I saw his broad shoulders instantly freeze. I watched his entire body lock into a rigid posture of absolute, terrifying comprehension. Printed in bold, black letters in the exact center of the page, was the specific phrase he had sent me in his final, cowardly email. It read, "Start a completely new life without any burdens tying you down." The psychological blow landed with devastating precision. In that singular fraction of a second, Silas realized he was not the brilliant mastermind of a grand illusion. He realized he was nothing more than a rat trapped in a maze built by the very woman he had severely underestimated. He violently crushed the paper in his fist, his head whipping around wildly in the dark, desperately searching for the hidden cameras he suddenly knew were watching him. He panicked. He scrambled backward, knocking over a heavy floor lamp, and sprinted out of the room like a hunted animal. But the trap had already snapped shut. The exact moment the safe door had opened, a specialized script on my server automatically executed. I did not even have to lift a single finger. The system instantly compiled the crystal clear, high-definition infrared footage of Silas breaking in, complete with time-stamped biometric metadata confirming his exact identity. With a silent digital hum, the server attached the video file to a heavily encrypted email. It bypassed the standard customer service portals and went directly to the private, direct inbox of the lead fraud investigator at the insurance company. Silas was running frantically into the cold night, completely unaware that the system had just delivered his official death sentence. Silas sprinted out the back door and vanished into the heavy shadows of the tree line just seconds before the perimeter sirens would have screamed into the silent night. He thought he had made a clean, untraceable getaway, utterly blind to the reality that his physical escape was completely meaningless. The digital net had already dragged him violently to the surface. By the time the sun rose at exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, the lead fraud investigator had thoroughly reviewed the time-stamped, high-definition infrared footage. The corporate insurance firm moved with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. They immediately contacted the federal authorities, handing over the biometric evidence that definitively proved the supposedly deceased policyholder was actively trespassing in his own home. Within a matter of mere hours, Silas and Elena were officially placed under a massive, coordinated federal surveillance umbrella for suspected wire fraud, faking a catastrophic death, and attempting to extort exactly $15 million from a heavily regulated financial institution. I did not give them a single moment to breathe, regroup, or reassess their rapidly crumbling strategy. I needed all the guilty rats trapped in the exact same room for the final extermination. I picked up my cell phone and arranged a highly formal, urgent meeting at my house for exactly 4 o'clock that afternoon. I extended mandatory invitations to the regional president of the life insurance company, his senior corporate counsel, my aggressive financial crimes lawyer, and, of course, my dearest, most trusted best friend. Elena, the bait I used was absolutely irresistible. I told them I had unexpectedly discovered a hidden, notarized last will and testament stuffed behind a heavy painting in the master bedroom, and that it legally mandated an immediate gathering of all interested parties to settle the vast estate entirely outside of a lengthy probate court battle. They all arrived promptly. The insurance president sat stiffly in a dark leather armchair, flanked closely by his legal counsel. My own attorney stood firmly by the brick fireplace, his leather briefcase resting neatly on the mantel. Elena sat right next to me on the plush velvet sofa, wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue dress, her face a carefully constructed, flawless masterpiece of sympathetic concern. She reached out and gently patted my knee, her eyes brimming with completely manufactured tears. "You are doing the right thing, Harper," Elena whispered softly, though her voice carried easily across the quiet, tense living room. "Silas made some incredibly terrible business decisions before he tragically passed away. He left behind massive, undocumented debts and angry investors. If this new will allows you to sign a complete legal waiver of the estate, you should absolutely take it. You need to formally reject the inheritance to protect yourself and the innocent baby from his vicious creditors." Let the bankruptcy courts liquidate everything. It is the only way you can be truly free and safe. She was so incredibly desperate to get my signature on a binding legal waiver. If I formally renounced my claim to his estate, she and Silas could easily swoop in through their anonymous shell corporations and claim the frozen offshore assets without facing any legal contest from the surviving widow. She was sitting in my house, drinking my hot tea, and actively trying to trick a grieving pregnant woman into absolute financial ruin. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her performance was almost breathtaking, but it only served to fuel the glacial, unforgiving fury burning steadily inside my chest. I smiled at her. It was not a sad, broken, or defeated smile. It was a cold, razor-sharp curve of my lips that made the artificial color completely drain from her flawless cheeks. I stood up slowly from the sofa and walked over to the smart home control panel mounted firmly on the wall. "There is no new will. Elena," I said, my voice echoing clearly and coldly in the heavy silence of the room. "But there is a final, urgent message from my husband that you all desperately need to see right now." I pressed a single tactile button. The heavy motorized blackout blinds instantly rolled down over the large living room windows, plunging the space into sudden darkness. The massive 85-inch television screen mounted above the fireplace flared to brilliant life. I did not show them a forged paper document. I played the raw, unedited infrared security footage from exactly 2 o'clock this morning. The room immediately erupted into absolute, stunned chaos. The insurance president gasped audibly, gripping the thick armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles turned completely white. His corporate counsel practically dropped his expensive fountain pen onto the hardwood floor. My own attorney stepped forward, his jaw completely unhinged as his eyes locked onto the glowing screen. They watched in crystal clear high definition as a very alive, breathing. Silas Mercer pried open the floorboards, unlocked the hidden steel safe, and stared into the camera lens with absolute, primal terror. The digital timestamp glowing bright green in the corner of the video ticked forward second by second, providing undeniable, irrefutable proof of life. "As you can clearly see, gentlemen," I announced, projecting my calm voice over the frantic, bewildered murmurs of the corporate executives, "my husband did not die in a tragic, catastrophic plane crash over the cold ocean. He did not sink to the bottom of the sea. He is currently running around this very city, actively conspiring to defraud your regulated institution out of exactly $15 million. Elena shot up from the sofa, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently as she pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is a fabricated lie. This is a deep fake," she screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate frequency of pure panic. "Harper is having a severe, pregnancy-induced psychological breakdown. She is completely delusional. She manufactured this entire video to frame us." I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink. I calmly walked over to the heavy oak coffee table and dropped a massive 500-page bound dossier directly in front of the stunned insurance executives. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the solid wood sounded exactly like a judge slamming a heavy wooden gavel. "That file contains every single encrypted text message, every recovered deleted email, and the exact offshore routing numbers proving Silas quietly liquidated his technology startup and transferred exactly $4,500,000 into a Cayman Islands trust fund," I stated coldly, watching the corporate lawyers immediately scramble to open the thick binder. I then turned my glacial gaze directly to the hyperventilating woman standing by the sofa. A highly secure trust fund solely controlled by my supposed best friend, Elena Rostova. Elena stumbled backward, her expensive designer heels catching awkwardly on the thick edge of the Persian rug, but I was absolutely not finished destroying her. I pulled a single, crisp medical document from my secondary folder and held it up into the bright light casting from the television screen. "This is a certified toxicology report from an independent, state-licensed laboratory," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, lethal register that demanded absolute silence. It definitively proves that the prenatal vitamins in my bathroom cabinet were heavily laced with a highly illegal chemical abortifacient. Silas secretly bribed a doctor exactly $250,000 to murder my unborn child, simply to ensure a clean, uncomplicated insurance payout, and Elena was his willing, enthusiastic, and greedy accomplice. The silence in the living room became completely suffocating. The sheer magnitude of the pure, unadulterated evil laid bare on the coffee table paralyzed every single person in the room. Elena looked wildly around the room, her terrified eyes darting frantically toward the hallway. She realized the grand illusion was entirely shattered. Her stolen fortune was gone. Her freedom was completely gone. She let out a pathetic, animalistic whimper and sprinted toward the heavy mahogany front door. She yanked the brass handle down and threw the door open, completely desperate to escape into the fading afternoon light, but she did not make it past the front porch. 4 heavily armed, uniformed police officers, accompanied by a senior detective from the Federal Fraud Division, were already standing firmly on the welcome mat. I had quietly coordinated their arrival with the insurance investigators hours before the meeting even began. The detective stepped forward, forcefully grabbed Elena by her trembling wrists, and roughly slammed them together behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the cold steel handcuffs echoing loudly through the open doorway was the absolute sweetest sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Silas did not manage to get very far. He was apprehended exactly 12 hours after he sprinted out of my back door in a blind panic, desperate and completely out of viable options. He had driven straight to a private, unregistered dirt airstrip just outside the county limits. He had paid a known cartel smuggler exactly $50,000 in stolen cash to secure a hidden spot on a small cargo plane headed deep into South America. He truly thought he could simply vanish into thin air a second time. But the federal agents had already tracked the signal from his burner phone and swarmed the dark tarmac before the airplane engines even started turning. They dragged him out of the cargo hold in heavy steel chains, permanently ending his pathetic attempt at a grand escape. The subsequent criminal trial took place exactly 8 months later, and it rapidly became a massive, highly publicized media spectacle. The courtroom was packed every single day with aggressive reporters and eager spectators waiting to see the final, humiliating downfall of the arrogant technology startup founder. My lead attorney stood confidently before the strict federal judge and systematically dismantled every single lie the defense attempted to construct. He presented the continuous biometric smartwatch data on a giant projector screen, definitively proving that Silas was actively jogging on a sunny beach and monitoring his optimal resting heart rate at the exact same moment I was lying in a hospital bed, heavily sedated and weeping over his supposed tragic death. The jury gasped audibly when my lawyer walked them step by step through the decrypted offshore banking transfers, the falsified immigration documents, and the horrific, cold-blooded text messages detailing his absolute disdain for the family he was leaving behind. However, the absolute most satisfying moment of the entire grueling trial was watching the two conspirators completely destroy each other in a desperate, animalistic bid for self-preservation. Elena took the witness stand on the 5th day and immediately attempted to secure a lenient plea deal by throwing Silas entirely under the bus. She sobbed loudly for the flashing cameras, loudly claiming she was a deeply manipulated, terrified victim of his sociopathic charms. She swore under oath that she knew absolutely nothing about the poisoned prenatal vitamins and that Silas had forced her to handle the stolen finances under the threat of extreme physical violence. Sitting at the defense table, Silas completely lost his temper. His carefully constructed facade of a calm, wealthy businessman shattered into a million jagged pieces. He stood up in the middle of the crowded courtroom, violently kicking his heavy wooden chair backward, and began screaming at her at the top of his lungs. He roared that it was actually her brilliant idea to eliminate the baby to ensure a faster, entirely uncomplicated insurance payout. He called her a greedy, manipulative parasite who had planned the entire disappearance just to steal his newly acquired wealth. They viciously tore each other to shreds under the bright courtroom lights, fully exposing the grotesque, bottomless depths of their mutual greed for the entire world to witness. The jury did not need to deliberate for very long. It took them less than exactly 4 hours to return a unanimous guilty verdict on every single charge. The federal judge looked down at them with pure, unadulterated disgust before delivering the final crushing sentence. He sentenced both Silas and Elena to exactly 25 years in a maximum security federal prison without any possibility of early parole. They were officially convicted of massive commercial wire fraud, faking a death across international borders, and the most serious charge of all, conspiracy to commit the premeditated murder of a pregnant woman. Furthermore, the civil court proceedings that followed completely stripped Silas of his remaining financial dignity. The judge ordered that the frozen $4,500,000 in the Cayman Islands account, along with his entire domestic real estate portfolio and remaining corporate assets, be awarded directly to me. It was granted as full compensation for severe, intentional emotional distress, punitive damages, and the lifetime costs of raising our child completely alone. They went to a cold concrete cell with absolutely nothing, while I walked out of the courtroom holding the keys to my absolute financial freedom. 2 years later, the heavy, suffocating darkness of that traumatic night feels like a distant, rapidly fading nightmare. I am standing proudly today on the bright, sunlit front steps of my newly founded, highly successful cybersecurity firm, entirely funded by the very money they arrogantly tried to steal from me. In my arms, I am holding my beautiful, perfectly healthy 1-year-old daughter. She is laughing brightly in the warm morning breeze. She has my eyes and absolutely none of his pathetic weakness. I am no longer a grieving widow, and I am certainly no longer a helpless victim. I am the sole architect of my own incredibly bright, unburdened future, living a deeply beautiful life where the dark shadows of betrayal can never reach us again. Thank you so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment and let me know your city or country. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping us out with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code directly on your screen, or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Your generous contribution of just $1 gives our channel the essential budget to pay our hardworking staff, helping them support their families and allowing us to continue creating even more amazing revenge stories for you. Have a truly wonderful day.